Welcome to the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology, Season 2, Day 6. So, bit by bit, I'm telling the twisted tale of Kilhwch and Olwen, and we're kind of sitting around examining the entrails for signs and portents. Please take a seat and join us. Our story begins when Kilhwch, our hero, was cursed by his stepmother. Her curse ran that he could have only one woman in the wide world, a maiden called Olwen. Her name means white track, for they said that white flowers sprung up under her feet wherever she walked. Olwen was the daughter of Ysbyddaden ben Cawr, the chief of giants, and he had absolutely no intention of letting Olwen marry any man if he could prevent it, for his own fate was to die when his daughter married. And this put Kilhwch in a bit of a bind. But Kilhwch had an ace up his sleeve. King Arthur was his cousin. Kilhwch made himself known in Arthur's court and began making demands in the name of Arthur and all his warriors. Once Kilhwch's lengthy invocation of Arthur's warband had ended, Arthur said that although he had never heard of Olwen, he would gladly send out messengers to search for her. They searched and searched, but not a whisper of her did they hear. January 1st arrived. It had now been a year, and Kilhwch was tired of waiting and had become angry. As they sat in the feasting hall, he said, "This is how it is. Everyone has had a gift except for me. Tomorrow I will leave your court, cousin, and I will take your honor with me." "How dare you speak to Arthur like that?" said Kai. "Let's gather the best men and go and look for her together." Kilhwch knew something of Kai's powers. Some said he only slept rarely, and he could become as tall as a tree at will. No sword wound he inflicted could be healed. Stranger still, no rain ever fell on him. It simply went around him. And that was handy, for he could always kindle a fire if needed. In fact, the heat in him was so fierce, he only had to hold the kindling in his hand and it would ignite. Arthur called on Bedwyr to go with them. Bedwyr the Beautiful, they called him, for only Arthur and one other man were as handsome. His swordplay, however, was second to none. With one hand tied behind him, he could easily best three-armed men. He could give a wound and 9 counter-thrusts in the blink of an eye. Cynddellig Gyfarwydd was the next to be called. His knowledge of the world was so great, there was no corner of the earth through which he would fail to guide you. Gurhir, the interpreter, knew all languages, both of men and animals, and he must go with him. And Menw, the magician, who knew many spells and could make himself and his companions invisible at will. Gwalchmai, Arthur's nephew, was sent with them, and for no mission that he undertook had he ever failed. He was as great a man on foot as on horseback. These were the men who set out with Kilhwch to search for Olwen. In time, they came to a wide plain, and there they saw a caer greater than any castle or fortress you can imagine. It loomed in the distance, so that all day they walked, and yet it seemed they would never reach it. Then they came to a great flock of sheep, which covered the country far and wide. An enormous shepherd sat atop a hillock, guarding the sheep, with a mastiff dog as big as a horse. He guarded both the sheep and the entrance to that territory with deadly intent, and it was said that his breath could kindle fire. "You go have a word with him," said Kai to Gurhir, eyeing the enormous dog. I might not understand him." "Well, I'll go if you go with me," said Gurhir. "Don't worry," said Menw. "I'll put a spell on the dog so he won't hurt you." They approached the shepherd. "We hope you're well," they said. "Only my wife afflicts me," returned the shepherd. "Do the sheep belong to that big caer over there?" they asked. Shepherd roared with laughter. "Everyone knows that is the fortress of Ysbyddaden, chief giant." They asked the shepherd his name. "I am Custennin," he replied, "and because of my wife, Ysbyddaden has taken everything from me. Who are you?" "We are Arthur's men. We have come in search for Olwen, his daughter." No, no, for the world's sake, you must not do that. He has killed everyone who has gone to ask about her. Shepherd rose to take his leave, and as he did, Kilhuch stepped forward and took a gold ring from his finger and gave it to the giant shepherd. He tried in vain to put it on, but it was far too small. So he dropped it inside his glove for safekeeping and went home. When Custennin got home, he handed the glove to his wife without a word. She discovered the ring and looked at it in wonder. Where did you get this ring, husband? I went fishing, but I found a corpse washed up on the beach. A most handsome corpse it was, and this ring was on its finger. She didn't believe him, and he said, Don't worry, you'll soon see the dead man coming over the hill. What do you mean by that? I mean Kilhuch, son of Kilith, whose mother was Goleithid, daughter of Anlawd Wledig. He's come to ask for Olwen, so I reckon he won't last long. The shepherd's wife was happy and sad at the same time. Goleithid was her sister, and she rejoiced at the thought of seeing her nephew, but at the same time she knew he was on a suicide mission. Soon the party was seen approaching the shepherd's house. The woman ran out to greet them. Now, if Custennin was a big man, his wife was larger still. She rushed to embrace Guy, who sensibly grabbed a huge log and thrust it into her arms in his place, where she made kindling of it. They were given hospitality, and as they sat talking, the woman opened a chest beside the hearth, and out came a fine-looking yellow-haired lad. Gur here said, Why do you hide such a fine son as this? I once had 24 sons, she said, but Ysbyddaden, chief giant, has killed them all, except for this lad. I suppose he will go the same way in the end. Let him come with us, said Kai. He will not be killed unless I am killed first, I promise you. What is your business here? Asked the shepherd's wife. To try and obtain Olwen for Kilhuch. No, no, for the world's sake, do not pursue that, she cried. You have not yet been seen by Ysbyddaden's men. Leave before they notice you. That we will not, they agreed. We must see Olwen. What places does she frequent? Every Saturday she visits me, and I help her wash her hair, and each time she leaves me her gold rings. Will she come here if you send for her? They asked. I will not send for her unless you promise not to harm her. They swore to this, and so Olwen was sent for. Well, it seems like things might be looking up for Kilhuch. He's going to meet Olwen at the very least. Against everyone's advice, of course, but never mind. As you can see, the description of the abilities of Kilhuch's companions is almost a kind of mini court list in itself. You may remember that a few days ago, I talked about how a live storyteller might deal with these long passages. Of course, medieval storytellers had different audiences than modern storytellers, and social conventions are different now too. I did compare two great modern storytellers' approach to this, though. You may have already listened to Robin Williamson's telling. I've been sharing that link, and he skips the court list entirely, but instead, he puts a lot of energy into painting vivid pictures of the descriptions of Kilhuch's companions. Welsh storyteller Michael Harvey, however, does a shortened but very entertaining court list in his telling, and that focuses partly on the companions. That one's also on YouTube, so I'll put links in today's references with some timestamps so you can listen without too much searching. I've mentioned before that a lot of the people in this story are related, so I want to take a look at that. So at the top here is a simplified family tree of Kilhuch and Arthur. Their mothers are sisters, and the giant wife of Custennin is a third sister. Gorai is the lad who they were hiding, who will now join the party and go on the quest with them. But down below is a much fuller picture of the children of Anlawd Wledig, who is said to be married to a daughter of Cenedda. As well as our characters, we're here now. He has a daughter who's the mother of British saints, two daughters, the mothers of British saints. And another daughter is the mother of Geraint, whose story is told in a famous poem. And this last group are mentioned in the court list. These two are Arthur's uncles, for example. So the other thing I want to look at today is giants. There are a lot of giants in this story. So first off is Ysbyddaden Ben Cawr, the star of the show. As you'll soon see, Thorny is a good name for him, and Little Thorny, I think, is a bit of a joke. He's anything but little. We'll talk about him in more detail tomorrow. For now, the important thing to know about him is that he's destined to die when Olwen marries, and this explains a lot about his behavior. Then there's Custennin. So one of the texts of Culhwch and Olwen says that Custennin is actually Ysbyddaden's brother. That's in the Red Book of Hergest text, and not in the White Book text. That's quite interesting. There's nothing to suggest that all of Anlawd Uledig's children are giants, so you can't help but wonder how this trait arises. It's also been suggested that Custennin has something in common with the Lord of the Forest character, the one who guards the way to the marble fountain in Owain. Their son, Gorai, he's not called Gorai yet, but he will be named Gorai later in the story. They keep him hidden away. Is he a giant? We can't be sure, but he seems to be antagonistic to other giants later in the story. Of course, Ysbyddaden has killed 23 of his brothers, so maybe that's why. You get the feeling that there's more than maybe one tribe of giants here. Then there's this pair, Diurnach Gower and Urnach Gower. It's thought that they may really be one individual with variant names. Maybe, maybe not. Urnach might mean something like complaining or snarling, and Diurnach might mean the opposite, but that's not certain. Some of these others in the other column are less certain. Mildi and Cow are both mentioned in the court list and are also in early saints' lives, where they're revived from death or they're uncovered by removing a cairn of stones. And Cow occurs in the court list as the father of a long list of warriors. Dithis Varvog is possibly a giant. His beard hairs are plucked out to make a leash for a hunting dog, and his cooking fire is described as enormous. So the way he's described kind of suggests a giant, and the same might be said for Osla Big Knife. Then there's Kai, who's able to transform into a giant and grow tall as a tree, we're told, a sort of elective giant. And there are some interesting giants elsewhere in Welsh lore. Bendigeidfran, or Bran the Blessed, is portrayed as king of all Britain in the second branch of the Mabinogi. He's a very positive character, but a somewhat ill-fated one. Another giant appears in that story, and he's more ambiguous. His name is Llasar, and like Urnach, he possesses a special cauldron. He and his wife Cymidai first appear in Ireland, where they breed so many other giants who are impossible to feed that it's decided to kill them by shutting them in an iron house and then building a fire around it. However, they'd escape to Britain, where Bran finds them useful as fighters. This is one of several stories where giants seem to be associated with greed and consuming too many resources. There's a similar theme in a story called Lludd and Llefelys, in which Lludd is plagued by a giant who sneaks into his castle and eats his food at night. Overall, giants remain ambiguous in Welsh lore. They're not always evil, but it seems to be open season on them in Culhwch and Olwen. I keep wondering what giants represent in these stories. In Welsh folklore, giants are often married couples, with the female giants being kind of blended with the storybook witch stereotype. They're often associated with awe-inspiring things in the landscape, like caves or great cairns of stone. In Scotland, kayak figures are sometimes giants. Sometimes they're more like witches and human-sized. The giant versions are frequently seen as incredibly ancient, living atop high mountains or inaccessible places, and they're often said to have created parts of the landscape. Maybe giants have always been seen a bit that way, representatives of the distant past, at one with nature and with geological timescales. Their manners and lifestyles are a bit primitive. Even Bendigeidfran is said never to have lived in a house. So here's today's challenge question. What do you think it means that Arthur and Kilhwch are related to giants? There's no right or wrong answer to this, but it's certainly a curious state of affairs to have giants in your family tree. What could it possibly mean? So tomorrow we're going to get to know Ysbyddaden Bencawr a bit better and visit his court and see what he's all about. So I'll see you then. So bye-bye for now. If you'd like to delve a little deeper into the topics in my videos, you might enjoy taking one of my online classes. You can find out more about them at the link which is on your screen now. You can also support my work on Ko-fi or by becoming a patron. You'll also find free content to read on my Patreon page and on my website. All the links are in the description.